Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Javier here with the Libertarian Investor, and it is Sunday night. We're waiting for markets to open, guys, and I am looking closely at several factors after the horrific numbers last week. I'm looking at gold, I'm looking at silver, I'm looking at copper, and I'm also looking at some specific companies, which I'll tell you about later, tomorrow, hopefully. And I've got my finger on the pulse of those. But while we're waiting on the markets to open, I'd like to just carry on this ideological discussion. If you've not seen my page on TikTok, I'd encourage you to go to it. It is also the Libertarian Investor, and I have put parts of videos that I put on this channel in their entirety. I put just small snippets of them on TikTok, and boy, have they gotten a lot of contents and a lot of comments rather, and a lot of trash and also a lot of contents. But I just want to read some of the comments about two of these comments because they were very pertinent. And then I want to comment on the comments so that I could give a full explanation here because it's about free market, guys. And I think the most important thing for human liberty and for a rising standard of living for all of us is a defense of the free market, a coherent defense. Ayn Rand was one of the first people in modern times to talk about the fact that business people do a good job keeping the free market running, but we do not do a good job philosophically defending it. I want to give that philosophical defense rather, in my own small way. So I got a comment here. It says, I said in my video about free market economics that I myself have always been pro-worker. I worked menial jobs in my 20s and I was mistreated by companies, by corporations, and I said I thought that was stupid, and I know that the free market, the true free market, will punish companies for being cruel to their workers. And I had a commenter say, the free market clearly does not punish businesses. Consumers would need to know and care about every business practice, which is absolutely not feasible, and I agree with that, which is why we have things like child labor laws and environmental laws. Now, Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian economists make it very clear that in our elucidation of economics, we're not depending upon perfect knowledge. No agent of the system has perfect knowledge. No one really has any knowledge of what's going on. But it's the system of a whole, as a whole rather, that has that knowledge and that will then dispense of that knowledge in the appropriate way. So let me give you a brief explanation of this. Let's say a company is mistreating a worker by underpaying that worker. Well, in a good free market, there will be lots of options for that worker to choose from, so that worker can simply go and work in the company that gives him or her better benefits. And then that will, as a whole, iron out these companies that say are not paying their workers well. If a company abuses his or her workers, well, first of all, in a free market, no company can force those workers to continue working for that company. Another aspect, because I know a lot of people are going to comment, oh, well, people don't have choices and things are too expensive. What's expensive in this economy? I know housing makes up the majority of expenses for most households, just housing or an apartment. In a true free market, housing prices would not be expensive. Those housing prices have been distorted for years by this idea that everyone needs to own a home, by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac before 2008, by giving subprime mortgages. What happened was more people were able to get homes, and therefore home prices rose, and home prices are now 2 or 3 times what they would have been. It is artificially propped up housing prices that are causing the majority of this expense, and the fact that people cannot make a livelihood enough to just pay basic expenses. In a free market, that wouldn't happen. So in a free market, guys, people would have more options. I put to you guys, and I would stand by this, that in a free market, most people would not even have to work, or they would just have to work a few hours a day. This is the beauty of the free market, because the prices of all goods and services, or the majority of goods and services, will go down. It's only government intervention and government regulations that forces prices to stay up. Think about the FDA. Think about all of this testing and proving to the government that things are safe that these companies have to do, and all these regulations. Those impose a huge cost, and those costs are all passed on to the consumer, which is the worker. So what system is better for workers? I would put to you free market is the best system for workers. Another comment, he says, same arguments from every economic system peddler, true is better, because I said the true free market is the best way. There's no such thing as true capitalism or true socialism or true communism. Maybe I did use some unfortunate terminology when I said true, but I'll explain what I mean. You need a system which pulls from all others, that's tailored specifically to the country's resources and customs for a truly prosperous economy. And my response is this, guys. The true free market system is a negative system. What do I mean by that? There is no system that someone has to devise, because Murray Rothbard talks about the fact that one of the first great books of libertarianism was the Tao Te Ching, and that's the ancient Chinese book of wisdom that talks about the fact that the Tao is just leaving things alone. And when you leave things alone and allow them to flow naturally, everything will be harmonious and perfect. That's, in my mind, is where all libertarianism springs from. So there's no system that needs to be imposed. All a government, if there would be one at all, and we can talk about that, but all a government needs to do is simply laissez-faire, simply keep hands off. They would defend private property. The one rule is that we respect private property. And that in itself is a negative rule. Why? Because it's simply, you cannot aggress against another human being or his creation, what he has homesteaded. So the human being has the right to his life by virtue of simply being born, by being human. He has the right to the space which he is on, because in order to live, he has to take up space. And he has the right to what he mixes his labor with, the land and the ideas and so on, the resources that he creates by his own labor or by an agent of his labor. That's the root of libertarianism. If the government would just respect that, life and property, and then allow the system to simply create itself, there would be a perfectly harmonious free market system. So no one has to create a system or impose it from the outside. And the commenter just commented a response to my comment here. And they said, all systems are imposed, and I disagree with that. Systems arise spontaneously, of course, from the relationships of their factors. They are anarchic, which is why I think anarcho-capitalism is the system closest to nature. But a free market is imposed, and I disagree with that. Free market is a system that simply arises from the natural outpouring of human action and human relations that spring up from that. You can just look at the whole thought experiment in economics of Robinson Crusoe and what happens on his island and so on. All systems rise spontaneously and anarchically, but are then molded over time to better fit a society. That's true. And who molds them? If they're molded spontaneously and naturally, and they have the consent of all parties involved, that is free market. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So I don't really see what the commenter here is positing that disagrees with me. He seems to be, he's agreeing with me. The argument that no one has more knowledge than nature is exactly my point. Well, I agree with you. A system is to be made to naturally mold around a society over time after spontaneous creation. So what do you mean after? If it's spontaneously created, then let it spontaneously mold itself. The free market is a system that spontaneously molds itself to all of the conditions of human action that are involved in it. So you're saying exactly what I'm saying, my friend. Not the other way around. Thus, you cannot have true form of any economic system because it assumes all people in a society perform and function identically to one another. And the free market system assumes that everyone acts according to his own self-interest, his or her own self-interest. So that is not true. We're not assuming that anyone performs anything. We're assuming that people are going to be people and act according to their nature. So I think you basically made my point for me. Thank you. So I love these comments, and I hope we keep them coming because we're having a great discussion here, and we are sharpening one another's understanding. Now, this same short I put on YouTube Shorts, and I encourage all of you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because not only do we have very delicious discussions about philosophy and ideology, but I actually tell you how I'm making money in the markets. That's what the channel is mainly about. But please do subscribe and like if you enjoy these videos. But one of my commenters said, anarcho-syndicalism is still better. And anarcho-syndicalism is a fascinating idea. In fact, I studied deeply the works of Noam Chomsky also in my early 20s, and I admire a lot of his critiques, and I still admire a lot of his critiques against interventionism, for free speech, and so on. So there's a lot in Noam Chomsky, who is an anarcho-syndicalist, to be appreciated, to be learned from. But I was going to comment, but I'll just say it in this video. The main problem with anarcho-syndicalism and all of these systems, like socialist libertarianism, while they have many great aspects, again, they deserve to be studied. The problem of private property, because everything hinges upon private property. Why? Because private property is an offspring of life. Just as Ludwig von Mises talks about the fact that praxeology and economics are an offshoot of reason, property is an offshoot of life, because as living beings, we have to have space to move in, and what we do is we mix our thoughts and labor with the natural environment, and we rearrange the factors, the atoms, if you will, of that environment. That's what we do. It's our creation. And if we do not have the right to our creation, then we would not even be able to live. So this is basically natural law, property. But anarcho-syndicalism, and I pulled up the definition here, and it's from AI, but I do recognize this as a good definition of anarcho-syndicalism. It says anarcho-syndicalism is a revolutionary ideology merging anarchism with industrial trade unionism, aiming to abolish capitalism and state through the direct action and worker self-management. It advocates for decentralized unions as the primary vehicle for class struggle and foundation of a future cooperative libertarian communist society. And these societies sound nice because everybody gets a vote. But this always devolves into totalitarianism. And you need look no further than watch Animal Farm or read Animal Farm by the author was an anarcho-syndicalist, I believe. And all of these quote-unquote libertarian ideas that do not respect property always end up in the hands of a dictatorship. And I can tell you, many of the menial jobs in my 20s, I tried to get the workers to get together for, better conditions and so on. None of the workers support one another. In fact, the workers will more likely turn one another in. And the reason is because everyone is self-interested. That's an axiom. Everybody looks after his or her self-interest. We're not going to create a non-selfish man, because man, by definition, even if you're giving charity, you're doing it out of selfishness and self-interest. So anarcho-syndicalism is a system that is against human nature. But anarcho-capitalism, which respects as the basis the right to life, the right to property, and the right or the obligation that no one aggresses against the property of another, that can work. And to the extent that a society adopts those ideas, there is a massive and quick economic recovery and increasing of the quality of life for the majority of citizens. So anarcho-syndicalism, a nice idea, but it's not based in property. It can never work. Just watch Animal Farm. So, okay, guys, we're waiting on the markets to open. We will be here tomorrow, and I will tell you about some of my investment plays. Until very soon, this is Javier Novoa with The Libertarian Investor. See you very soon. Have a great week coming up in the markets.